The dust had barely settled from the incoming train when Thomas Harper heard a voice that made his blood run cold, calling out a name he had buried 15 years ago in an unmarked grave of silence and shame. "Excuse me, sir. I am looking for Thomas James Harper," the woman said, her voice clear and melodic despite the obvious exhaustion from her long journey. She stood on the platform at Jefferson, Texas, a worn carpetbag in one gloved hand and a letter clutched in the other, her green eyes scanning the small crowd of people waiting at the station this humid afternoon in July of 1878. Thomas felt his heart hammer against his ribs so hard he thought it might break through. Nobody in Jefferson knew his middle name. Nobody in Jefferson knew his real surname. For 15 years, he had been Tom Hill, just another ranch hand who had worked his way up to foreman at the Double Creek Ranch. Just another cowboy with a quiet past and an even quieter present. The name Harper belonged to a different man, a younger man, a foolish boy who had made mistakes that cost him everything. "Madam, you might want to check with the telegraph office," one of the other men waiting on the platform suggested, tipping his hat. "They keep records of folks around here." The woman nodded, her dark curls escaping from beneath her simple bonnet. She was beautiful in an understated way, Thomas noticed despite his panic. Not the painted beauty of saloon girls, but something softer, more genuine. Her traveling dress was modest but well made, though he could see it had been mended in places. Everything about her spoke of genteel poverty, of someone who had known better days. Thomas knew he should walk away. He should mount his horse and ride back to the ranch and pretend he had never heard his real name spoken aloud after all these years. But his feet would not move. Instead, he found himself drawn forward, pulled by an invisible thread toward this woman who somehow knew who he really was. "Miss," he heard himself say, his voice rougher than he intended. "I might be able to help you find who you are looking for." She turned those green eyes on him, and Thomas felt something shift inside his chest. Up close, she was even lovelier, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though worry lines creased her brow now. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed. "I have traveled all the way from Boston, and I confess I am quite overwhelmed. I am Clara Grace, and I am here to marry Thomas James Harper. We have been corresponding for 6 months, and he sent me money for the train fare and told me to meet him here in Jefferson." The world tilted sideways. Thomas gripped the porch railing of the station platform to steady himself. A mail-order bride. Someone had been writing to this woman using his real name, his full real name, and had brought her all the way to Texas. "Miss Grace," he managed, his mind racing. "I think there has been some kind of mistake." Her face fell, and he saw fear flash in her eyes. "A mistake? But I have all the letters. I have the train fare he sent. Are you saying Thomas Harper does not live here?" Several people on the platform were starting to take interest in their conversation. Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, had stopped her bustling to frankly stare. Old Pete from the livery was leaning closer, his weathered face curious. Thomas knew that within an hour, the whole town would be buzzing with this news if he did not handle it carefully. "No, madam, I am not saying that exactly," Thomas said, lowering his voice. "But this is a complicated situation. Would you allow me to buy you some lunch at the hotel? You must be hungry after your journey, and we can discuss this privately." Clara hesitated, her hand tightening on her carpetbag. "Sir, I do not even know your name." "Tom Hill," he said automatically, then cursed himself inwardly. "I work at the Double Creek Ranch outside town. I promise you, Miss Grace, I mean you no harm. I just think we need to talk about this situation away from prying ears." She looked around the platform, seeming to notice for the first time how many people were watching them with undisguised interest. Her cheeks flushed pink. "Very well, Mr. Hill, but I insist on paying for my own meal." "That will not be necessary," Thomas said, picking up her carpet bag before she could protest. "The hotel is just across the street." The Jefferson Hotel was a respectable establishment, modest but clean, and the dining room was nearly empty at this hour between lunch and dinner. Thomas chose a table in the corner, away from the windows and the few other patrons. Clara sat down gracefully, removing her gloves and bonnet with practiced movements that spoke of good breeding. "Would you like some water?" Thomas asked, signaling to the serving girl. "Or perhaps some lemonade?" "Water would be lovely, thank you," Clara said. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap, and Thomas realized she was frightened. She was alone in a strange town, far from home, and the man she had come to marry was apparently nowhere to be found. After they had ordered simple fare of chicken and biscuits, Thomas leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "Miss Grace, I need to see those letters you mentioned. I believe someone has been playing a cruel trick on you and possibly on me as well." Clara's eyes widened. "On you? But you said your name was Tom Hill, not Thomas Harper." "It is a long story," Thomas said. "But I swear to you I have never written to any woman in Boston, and I certainly did not send money for train fare. However, Thomas James Harper is in fact my real name. It is a name I have not used in 15 years. The color drained from Clara's face. "Then who has been writing to me?" "That is what I aim to find out," Thomas said grimly. He had enemies, surely. Any man who had lived as long as he had in the rough country of Texas made enemies. But who would know his real name? Who would care enough to orchestrate something like this? Clara reached into her reticule with shaking hands and pulled out a packet of letters tied with a ribbon. There must have been 20 or more. She handed them to Thomas, watching his face carefully as he untied the ribbon and opened the first one. The handwriting was educated, flowing, nothing like his own rough scrawl. But the details made his stomach turn. The letter writer knew things. He knew about the Double Creek Ranch. He knew about Jefferson. He even knew details about Thomas's daily life, the kind of things only someone who watched him regularly would know. "I usually ride into town on Saturdays for supplies." Thomas read aloud from one letter, dated 3 months prior. "The work is hard but honest, and I have managed to save enough to start thinking about settling down, perhaps starting a small farm of my own someday." All of it was true. Thomas did ride into town on Saturdays. He had been saving his wages. He had idly dreamed of buying some land, though he had never spoken of it to anyone. "This is deeply unsettling," Clara whispered. "If you did not write these, then who did? And how did they know so much about you?" Thomas flipped through more letters, his jaw tightening. Whoever had written these had painted a picture of a lonely but honorable man, hard-working and ready for a wife and family. They had promised Clara a simple but good life, respect, and affection. The letters were actually quite romantic in places, speaking of watching the sunset over the Texas plains and imagining sharing such moments with a partner. "These are beautiful letters," Clara said softly. "I was so moved by them. The man who wrote them seemed so sincere, so kind. He asked about my life, my interests. He did not just talk about himself." "What did you tell him about yourself?" Thomas asked. Clara's cheeks flushed again. "Everything, I suppose. I told him about my family, about my father dying 2 years ago and my mother last winter. About my older brother who inherited the house, and whose new wife made it quite clear there was no longer room for me. I told him I had worked as a seamstress, but could barely afford my tiny room. I told him about my fears and my hopes. I suppose I bared my soul to a stranger." The pain in her voice cut through Thomas like a knife. This woman had been vulnerable, desperate even, and someone had taken advantage of that to play some kind of twisted game. "I am sorry, Miss Grace," he said, and he meant it. "I do not know what is happening here, but I intend to find out. In the meantime, we need to figure out what to do with you." "I have no money to return to Boston," Clara said quietly. "I used everything I had for additional supplies for the journey. The money your impostor sent covered the train fare and little else. I suppose I will need to find work here in Jefferson." Their food arrived, and they ate in silence for a few moments. Thomas's mind was racing. He had to get to the bottom of this, but he also felt a strange responsibility for this woman. She had been brought here under false pretenses using his name. That made her his problem in a way. "You can stay at the hotel tonight," Thomas said. "I will pay for the room." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," Clara protested. "It is not charity. Someone used my name to bring you here. Until we figure out who and why, I feel responsible for your welfare." He paused, then added, "Besides, I get the feeling that whoever did this wanted you to arrive and find me. They wanted something to happen. I am not sure what, but I intend to find out." Clara studied him across the table, her green eyes searching his face. "You are not at all what I expected," she said finally. "How so?" "The letters painted you as someone thoughtful and gentle, someone who noticed the beauty in small things. I expected someone older, perhaps, more settled." "You look like you have lived hard." Thomas almost laughed at that. At 33, he supposed he did look weathered. The sun had darkened his skin and created lines around his eyes. His hands were calloused from years of rope and leather. A scar ran along his jaw from a long-ago fight he preferred not to remember. "I have lived hard," he admitted. "But Miss Grace, I want you to understand something. Whoever wrote those letters, it was not me. I am not a man of pretty words. I am just a ranch foreman trying to do honest work and stay out of trouble." "And why did you change your name 15 years ago?" Clara asked, her eyes sharp despite her obvious exhaustion. "What are you hiding from Mr. Harper?" It was a fair question, and Thomas supposed he owed her some kind of answer. He pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. "I killed a man," he said bluntly. "Back in Missouri when I was 18. It was a fair fight, witnesses saw it, but the man I killed was the son of a powerful judge. Self-defense did not matter. I was going to hang for it, so I ran. I have been running ever since, in a way. I came to Texas and became someone else." He expected horror, disgust, fear. Instead, Clara just nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. "I appreciate knowing the truth, even if it is difficult. You are not frightened, Mr. Harper. I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man I had never met. I left behind everything I knew because I had nothing left to lose. Fear is a luxury I cannot afford right now. What I need is to understand my situation and determine how to move forward." Thomas found himself respecting this woman more with every passing minute. She had steel in her spine despite her circumstances. "Very well," he said. "Here is what I propose. I will get you a room here at the hotel. Tomorrow I will start asking around, seeing if I can figure out who might have sent those letters. Jefferson is not a large town. Someone knows something. In the meantime, you should rest and recover from your journey." "And then what?" Clara asked. "Then we figure out what happens next," Thomas said. "One step at a time." He paid for the meal and the room, ignoring Clara's protests. As he handed her the room key, their fingers brushed, and Thomas felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. This woman was supposed to be his bride in another life, another set of circumstances. The thought was both absurd and strangely compelling. "Thank you, Mr. Harper," Clara said softly. "I know none of this is your fault, and I appreciate your help." "Tom," he said. "You can call me Tom." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Then you must call me Clara." Thomas tipped his hat and left the hotel, his mind churning. He needed to get back to the ranch, but first he wanted to stop by the telegraph office. Someone had sent money to Clara. There would be a record of it. The telegraph operator, a man named Silas Green who had worked in Jefferson for as long as Thomas had been there, looked up when he entered. "Afternoon, Tom. What can I do for you?" "Silas, did you send any telegrams for me in the past 6 months? Or any money transfers in my name?" Silas frowned, scratching his graying beard. "For you? No, not that I recall. Why, how about in the name of Thomas Harper?" The change in Silas was immediate. His eyes widened, and he actually took a step back. "Thomas Harper? Tom, what is going on?" "You know that name," Thomas said. It was not a question. "I know that name because someone has been sending telegrams under it for months now," Silas admitted. "But Tom, I swear I thought it was you. The man who came in, he looked enough like you to be your brother. Same build, same coloring. He always wore his hat low, and he always came right at closing time when I was alone. He paid in cash, good money, and I had no reason to question him." Thomas's blood ran cold. "When was the last time he was here?" 3 days ago, Silas said. He sent a final telegram to Boston, confirming the arrival details. "Did you see which way he went when he left? Toward the saloon, I think. But Tom, I was not really paying attention. I was just glad to close up and get home to supper." Thomas thanked him and left, his mind racing. Someone who looked like him had been impersonating him for months. Someone who knew his real name, his past. This was not a random prank. This was calculated, personal. He rode back to the Double Creek Ranch as the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch sprawled across thousands of acres, cattle dotting the landscape. The main house was a solid structure of wood and stone, and the bunkhouse where Thomas stayed with the other ranch hands was simple but comfortable. The owner of the ranch, a man named William Pritchard, was sitting on the porch of the main house when Thomas rode up. Pritchard was in his 60s, a fair man who treated his workers well. He had given Thomas a job when he first arrived in Jefferson with nothing but the clothes on his back and a false name. "Tom, got a minute?" Pritchard called out. Thomas dismounted and tied his horse, walking up to the porch. "Yes, sir." "Heard some interesting gossip from town," Pritchard said, his weathered face amused. "Something about a pretty girl showing up at the train station asking for you by a name I have never heard before." News traveled fast in a small town. Thomas sighed and leaned against the porch railing. "It is complicated, sir." "Most things involving pretty girls usually are," Pritchard said with a chuckle. "Want to tell me about it?" Thomas did. He had always been honest with Pritchard about most things, and the man had earned his trust over the years. He explained about the letters, the imposter, Clara's arrival. The only thing he left out was the exact reason he had changed his name in the first place. Pritchard listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When Thomas finished, the older man was quiet for a long moment. "This is a strange business," Pritchard said finally. "Someone going to a lot of trouble to bring that girl here. The question is why?" "I have been asking myself the same thing," Thomas admitted. "Could be someone trying to trap you, expose your real identity," Pritchard suggested. "But that does not make sense. If they wanted to turn you in, they could have done it without all this elaborate setup. Could be someone with a grudge, trying to cause you trouble. Or could be something else entirely." "I need to figure it out," Thomas said. "But in the meantime, I am worried about Clara. She is alone in town with no money and nowhere to go." Pritchard gave him a knowing look. "Pretty, is she?" "That is not the point," Thomas said, but he felt heat creep up his neck. "Sure it is not," Pritchard said, grinning. Tell you what, Tom, you have been a good foreman for me, never caused any trouble. Take a few days, sort this out. And if that girl needs work, my wife could use some help with the sewing and such. Lord knows Sarah has been complaining about her eyesight getting too poor for the fine work. I appreciate that, sir, Thomas said, genuinely grateful. Just do me a favor, Pritchard added. Be careful. This whole thing smells like trouble to me, and I would hate to lose my best foreman over it. Thomas promised to be careful and headed to the bunkhouse. The other ranch hands were already settling in for the evening, playing cards and swapping stories. They looked up when he entered, and he could see the curiosity in their faces. "Tom, that true about a mail-order bride showing up for you?" asked Miguel, one of the younger hands. "It is true a woman showed up, but there has been a misunderstanding," Thomas said carefully. "I am working on sorting it out. She pretty?" Another hand called out, and several of the men laughed. "She is a lady, and you will treat her with respect if you see her in town," Thomas said, his tone brooking no argument. The laughter died down, and the men went back to their cards. Thomas lay in his bunk that night, staring at the ceiling. He kept thinking about Clara's face when she realized he had not sent those letters. The disappointment and fear in her eyes had struck something deep inside him. She had come all this way hoping for a new life, for someone who would care about her, and instead she had found a stranger and a mystery. He thought about the letters too. Whoever had written them had gotten something right. Thomas did watch the sunsets and find them beautiful. He did want, somewhere deep down, to have a home and a family. He had just never admitted it to anyone, barely even to himself. How had the imposter known? The next morning, Thomas was up before dawn. He did his usual rounds at the ranch, checking on the cattle and the fences, making sure the hands knew their assignments for the day. But his mind was elsewhere, and as soon as he could reasonably get away, he saddled his horse and headed back to town. He found Clara in the hotel dining room having breakfast. She looked better after a night's rest, though her dress was the same one from yesterday. He realized she probably did not have many clothes in that single carpet bag. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "May I join you?" "Of course," Clara said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I was hoping I might see you today. I have been thinking about this situation all night." "As have I," Thomas admitted. "I spoke with the telegraph operator yesterday. He said a man has been coming in for months, sending telegrams under my real name. A man who looks enough like me to pass for a relative." Clara's eyes widened. "So there really is someone impersonating you, but who? And why?" "I do not know yet, but I intend to find out," Thomas said. "In the meantime, I spoke with my employer. His wife needs help with sewing and household tasks. If you are interested, it would be honest work and would include room and board at the ranch." Clara set down her coffee cup carefully. "That is very generous, but Tom, I cannot help feeling this is charity." "It is not charity. Sarah Pritchard genuinely needs the help and you genuinely need work. It solves both problems." "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked, her green eyes searching his face. "You owe me nothing. In fact, I am an inconvenience thrust upon you by someone else's schemes." Thomas considered the question. Why was he helping her? He could have pointed her toward the church, let the minister's wife find her some work, and washed his hands of the whole situation. Instead, he felt drawn to her, responsible for her in a way that went beyond the mere coincidence of his name. "Because you came here believing in something," he said finally. "Believing in the promise of a better life, of someone who would value you. That took courage. And because someone used my name to lie to you, that makes it my responsibility to help make it right." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Those are kind words. The man who wrote those letters would have said something like that." "Maybe he knew me better than I know myself," Thomas said wryly. Or maybe you are better than you think you are, Clara suggested. They finished breakfast, and Thomas helped Clara gather her few belongings. As they walked to where his horse was hitched, several townspeople stared openly. Thomas ignored them, but he could feel the weight of their curiosity. "I suppose we are the talk of the town," Clara said quietly. "Jefferson is a small place. People like to gossip. It will blow over once something more interesting happens," Thomas assured her. He helped Clara onto his horse, then mounted behind her. She stiffened at first, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity, but as they began the ride out to the ranch, she gradually relaxed. Thomas was acutely aware of her sitting in front of him, the scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth of her back against his chest. "Texas is very different from Boston," Clara said as they rode through the open country. "So much space, so much sky." "Do you miss the city?" Thomas asked. "I miss the familiarity of it," Clara admitted. "But truthfully, there was not much left for me there. My brother and his wife made it clear I was a burden. I had no real friends, no prospects. At least here there is possibility. Even given the circumstances of your arrival." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Even then, is that foolish?" "No," Thomas said. "I think it is brave." They arrived at the ranch mid-morning. Sarah Pritchard came out of the main house to greet them, her round, kind face breaking into a smile when she saw Clara. "You must be the young lady William told me about," Sarah said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome to the Double Creek. I am Sarah Pritchard." "Clara Grace, madam," Clara said, curtsying slightly as Thomas helped her down from the horse. "Your husband mentioned you might have work available." "I am a skilled seamstress and have experience with household management." "Music to my ears, dear," Sarah said, beaming. "Come inside, let me show you around. Tom, thank you for bringing her out." Thomas tipped his hat and led his horse to the barn, but he found himself watching the house, wondering how Clara was settling in. He forced himself to focus on his work, riding out to check on the hands who were moving cattle to a new grazing area. But throughout the day, his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara, to the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, to her quiet dignity in the face of disappointment and uncertainty, to the curve of her neck, the softness of her voice. He was being ridiculous, Thomas told himself firmly. The woman had been here less than 24 hours. She was supposed to marry him based on letters he had not written. The whole situation was a mess. The last thing he should be doing was developing feelings for her. When he returned to the ranch that evening, he found Clara sitting on the porch with Sarah, both women bent over some sewing. They looked up as he approached, and Clara smiled at him, a genuine warm smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Tom, you should see the work Clara did today," Sarah said enthusiastically. "She repaired 3 of William's shirts, mended my best tablecloth, and she is just now starting on a new dress for me. She has magic fingers with a needle." "I am glad to be useful," Clara said softly. "And Sarah has been so kind, showing me around, making me feel welcome." "We are happy to have you, dear," Sarah said, patting Clara's hand. "Now, Tom, you staying for supper? I made a roast, plenty to go around." Thomas was about to decline, as he usually ate with the hands in the bunkhouse, but Clara looked at him with such hopeful eyes that he found himself accepting. Dinner was a pleasant affair. The Pritchards were easy company, and they drew Clara out, asking about her life in Boston, her family. Clara spoke warmly of her parents, her voice only catching slightly when she mentioned their deaths. She talked about learning to sew from her mother, about the little shop where she had worked. "And what about you, Tom?" Clara asked at one point. "What brought you to Texas?" Thomas felt the Pritchards' eyes on him. They knew he had secrets, though they had never pressed him on them. "I was looking for a fresh start," he said simply. "Texas seemed as good a place as any." "You have family back east," Clara pressed gently. No, Thomas said, and it was true. His parents had died when he was young and he had no siblings. The judge's son he had killed had been his only close friend before the fight that changed everything. "I am alone in this world." "Not anymore," Sarah said kindly. "You have us. You have been like a son to William and me these past years." Thomas felt his throat tighten at her words. He had not expected to find family in Texas, but the Pritchards had given him that in their quiet way. After dinner, Thomas offered to walk Clara to the small room off the kitchen where Sarah had set her up. It was a cozy space, clearly once used for storage but now cleaned and furnished with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a small table with a lamp. "This is lovely," Clara said, looking around. "Much nicer than the room I had in Boston." "Sarah seems very pleased with your work," Thomas said, lingering in the doorway. "She is a wonderful woman." "They both are," Clara said. Then, after a pause, "You are lucky to have found them." "I am," Thomas agreed. "Clara, I want you to know I am still trying to find out who sent those letters. I will not let this go." "I believe you," Clara said. She stepped closer to him, and in the lamplight her eyes seemed even greener. "Tom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Those letters, the ones the impostor sent, would you want the things he described? A home, a family, someone to share your life with?" Thomas felt his breath catch. It was such a simple question, but it cut to the heart of things. "I never let myself want those things," he admitted. "It seemed safer not to." "But if you did let yourself want them," Clara persisted. "Then yes," Thomas said quietly. "I suppose I would want exactly what he described." Clara nodded slowly, as if he had confirmed something she had been wondering. "Thank you for being honest with me." "Always," Thomas promised. He left then, before he could do something foolish like reach for her hand or tell her how beautiful she looked in the lamplight. He had known this woman for barely a day. He had no right to the feelings that were growing in his chest. Over the next few days, Thomas threw himself into finding the impostor while Clara settled into life at the ranch. He questioned everyone in town who might have seen something, traced every lead, but came up empty. Whoever had orchestrated this was either long gone or very good at hiding. Meanwhile, he could not help but notice how naturally Clara fit into the ranch life. She worked hard, earning Sarah's praise and affection. She was kind to the ranch hands, treating them with respect regardless of their rough manners. She seemed to have a special way with the children of the ranch workers, often telling them stories or helping them with small tasks. And she noticed things. She noticed when one of the hands injured his hand and quietly made him a salve. She noticed that Thomas took his coffee black and always had a cup ready when he came in from the morning rounds. She noticed everything and everyone, caring for them all in her quiet way. Thomas found himself seeking her out, making excuses to stop by the main house. They would talk sometimes for hours about everything and nothing. She told him about books she had read, about the ocean she could see from Boston. He told her about the cattle drives, about learning to rope and ride, about the wild beauty of Texas. "You ever think about going back east?" Clara asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sarah and William had gone to bed early, leaving them alone. "No," Thomas said. "There is nothing for me there, just bad memories and a price on my head." "Is that why you changed your name? Because there is a price on your head?" Thomas had told her the basics of his past, but not all the details. Now, sitting here with her in the peaceful evening, he found himself wanting to tell her everything. "The man I killed, his name was Daniel Ashford. His father was Judge Ashford, one of the most powerful men in Missouri. Daniel and I grew up together. We were friends, or so I thought. He had a cruel streak, especially when he drank. One night he went too far. There was a girl, a servant in his father's house. Daniel forced himself on her, and when I tried to stop him, he attacked me. We fought. I did not mean to kill him, but when he pulled a knife, I defended myself. He died." Clara listened without interrupting, her hand finding his on the porch railing. "The girl testified that it was self-defense," Thomas continued. "Others who witnessed it said the same, but Judge Ashford had already decided I would hang. He bribed witnesses, manipulated evidence. I was 18 years old and looking at a noose for defending a helpless girl, so I ran. I have been running ever since." "That is terrible," Clara whispered. "You did the right thing and you have been punished for it anyway." "I have often wondered if I should have stayed and faced it," Thomas admitted. "Maybe I would have been acquitted, maybe the truth would have won out. Or maybe you would have been hanged by a corrupt judge seeking revenge," Clara said firmly. "You survived, Tom. You made a life for yourself. There is no shame in that." "But I have lived under a false name, hiding from who I really am," Thomas said. "Who you really are has nothing to do with your name," Clara said. "It has to do with your character, your actions. And from what I have seen, Tom Hill and Thomas Harper are the same man, a good man." He turned to look at her, and the expression in her eyes took his breath away. There was warmth there, affection, maybe even something deeper. Without thinking, he reached up and touched her cheek, his rough fingers gentle against her soft skin. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What is it? I am glad you came here." "I know the circumstances are strange, and I know this is not what you expected, but I am glad nonetheless." "So am I," Clara said softly. "Is that wrong? Should I be angry about being deceived, about the letters being lies?" "The letters were not lies," Thomas said. "Not entirely. The person who wrote them, whoever they were, they somehow knew me. They knew what I wanted, even if I did not admit it to myself. Every word they wrote about wanting a home, a family, someone to share life with, that was all true. They were writing my heart without my permission." "Then maybe," Clara said, her eyes searching his, "maybe something good can come from this deception. Maybe whoever did this gave us both a gift, even if they did it in a twisted way." Thomas wanted to kiss her. He wanted it so badly he could taste it, but he held back. It was too soon, too complicated. She deserved better than to be kissed on a porch by a man she barely knew, a man living under a false name with a dark past. "I should let you get to sleep," he said, reluctantly pulling back. "You have been working hard for Sarah." Clara nodded, though he saw disappointment flash in her eyes. "Good night, Tom." "Good night, Clara." But that night, lying in his bunk, Thomas made a decision. He was tired of hiding, tired of running. If he and Clara were going to have any kind of future together, and he was starting to desperately want that, then he needed to be honest about who he was. He needed to stop being afraid of his past. The next morning, he rode into town early and went straight to the telegraph office. Silas looked up in surprise when he entered. "Tom, what can I do for you?" "I need to send a telegram," Thomas said. "To the sheriff in Cooper County, Missouri." Silas's eyes widened. "Missouri? Tom, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done 15 years ago," Thomas said. "I am going to find out if there is still a warrant out for Thomas Harper, and if so, I am going to see about clearing my name." "That is a dangerous game you are playing," Silas warned. "Maybe," Thomas agreed. "But I am tired of running. I am tired of living half a life." He dictated the telegram, asking about the legal status of Thomas Harper in relation to the death of Daniel Ashford in 1863. He paid Silas and left, feeling both terrified and liberated. When he returned to the ranch, he found Clara in the garden behind the main house, picking vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "You are back early," she said. "I had something I needed to do," Thomas said. He dismounted and walked over to her, taking the basket from her hands and setting it down. "Clara, I sent a telegram to Missouri this morning. I am trying to find out if there is still a warrant for my arrest." Clara's face paled. "Tom, why? You have been safe here. Why stir things up now?" "Because I want a future," Thomas said simply. "And I cannot have one while I am living a lie. If I am going to move forward, I need to settle the past. And if there is still a warrant, if they want to arrest you, then I will face it," Thomas said. "But Clara, I need you to understand something. I am doing this for us, for the possibility of us. I cannot court you properly, cannot marry you, cannot build a life with you while I am hiding who I really am." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You want to court me?" "More than I have ever wanted anything," Thomas admitted. "These past days, getting to know you, watching you become part of this place, part of my life, I cannot imagine you not being here. But I will not trap you the way the impostor tried to trap you. I will not build a relationship on lies and half-truths." Clara stepped forward and took his hands in hers. "Then we wait together," she said. "We wait to hear back from Missouri, and whatever the answer is, we face it together." "You barely know me," Thomas protested. "I know enough," Clara said firmly. "I know you are honest and kind. I know you work hard and treat people fairly. I know you took responsibility for a situation that was not your fault because you felt it was the right thing to do. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen and valued in a way I never have before. That is enough." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet morning, the future uncertain but the present perfect. The telegram response came 3 days later. Thomas was in town when Silas tracked him down, waving the paper urgently. "Tom, you need to read this," Silas said, slightly out of breath from running. Thomas took the telegram with shaking hands. It was from the sheriff of Cooper County, Missouri, a man named James Walters. Thomas read it once, then read it again, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Thomas Harper, stop, no active warrant, stop, Judge Ashford died 1871. Stop, case reviewed and dismissed 1872. Due to witness recantations. Stop, you are a free man, stop, advise you obtain official documentation, stop, Sheriff Walters, stop, no warrant," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The case was dismissed." "That is wonderful news," Silas said, grinning. "Tom, you are free. You can stop hiding." Thomas felt something break open inside his chest, years of fear and guilt pouring out. He had spent 15 years looking over his shoulder, building walls around himself, never letting anyone truly know him. And all that time, he had been free. He rode back to the ranch at a gallop, his heart pounding. He found Clara hanging laundry with Sarah, and the look on his face must have said everything because she dropped the shirt she was holding and ran to him. "What happened? What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong," Thomas said, laughing. He picked her up and spun her around, not caring that Sarah was watching with an amused smile. "Everything is right. There is no warrant, Clara. The case was dismissed years ago. I am free." Clara threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "That is wonderful." "Oh, Tom, that is the best news." He set her down but kept his arms around her waist. "Clara Grace, I am going to do this properly. I am going to court you the right way with my real name and my real identity. I am going to show you off to the whole town. And when the time is right, I am going to ask you to marry me, and I will mean every word of it." "And I will say yes," Clara said, her eyes shining. "When the time is right, I will absolutely say yes." Over the following weeks, Thomas went about reclaiming his real identity. He sent for the official documentation from Missouri, proving the case had been dismissed. He told the Pritchards the full truth of his past, and they accepted it with grace and compassion. He started introducing himself in town as Thomas Harper again, enduring the curious looks and whispered questions with Clara by his side, and he courted her, properly, publicly, joyfully. He took her on buggy rides through the countryside, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings, talking about their dreams and hopes for the future. The mystery of who had sent the letters remained unsolved, but somehow it mattered less with each passing day. Whoever had done it, whatever their motives, had given Thomas and Clara a gift. They had brought them together. One evening, about 2 months after Clara's arrival, Thomas and Clara were walking by the creek that ran through the ranch property. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and orange. Clara had her hand tucked into his arm, and they walked in comfortable silence. "Tom," Clara said suddenly, "look at that." She pointed to a tree by the creek, and Thomas saw something carved into the bark. He walked closer, pulling Clara with him, and felt his heart stop. Carved into the tree were initials, TJH plus CG, and a date from 3 months earlier, before Clara had even left Boston. "Someone knew," Clara whispered. "Someone knew we would end up here, standing by this tree." Thomas examined the carving closely. The bark had grown over it slightly, confirming it had been there for some time. Someone had carved this, had planned this, had somehow orchestrated their entire meeting. "This is getting more unsettling," Thomas said. "Whoever did this has been watching the ranch, watching us." "But why?" Clara asked. "If they wanted to hurt us, they have had plenty of opportunities. If they wanted to expose you, they could have done that. What do they want?" As if in answer, Thomas heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. He instinctively pulled Clara behind him, his hand going to the gun at his hip. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Thomas found himself staring at a face he had not seen in 15 years. "Hello, Thomas," the man said. "I have been waiting for the right moment to reveal myself." Thomas felt Clara's hand tighten on his arm. The man standing before them was older, weathered by time and sun, but unmistakable. It was Nathan Harper, Thomas's cousin, who had disappeared shortly after the incident with Judge Ashford's son. "Nathan," Thomas said, his voice rough with shock. "You are alive. I thought you were dead." "I let everyone think that," Nathan said, stepping closer. "It was safer that way. After you ran, Judge Ashford came after anyone associated with you. I barely escaped with my life. I fled west, ended up in Texas eventually. I have been keeping tabs on you for years, Thomas, making sure you were safe." "You sent the letters," Clara said, her voice steady despite her obvious shock. "You brought me here." "I did," Nathan admitted, looking at Clara with something like pride. "You are even lovelier than your letters suggested, Miss Grace. I am sorry for the deception, but I could not think of any other way." "Why?" Thomas demanded. "Why go to all this trouble?" Nathan sighed, and for the first time, Thomas noticed how tired his cousin looked, how worn. "Because you are the only family I have left, Thomas. Because I have been alone for 15 years, watching from a distance, never able to approach you for fear of putting you in danger. When Judge Ashford died, when the case was dismissed, I thought finally we could reconnect. But you did not know you were free. You kept hiding, kept running. So you sent Clara to me," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "You thought that would force me to confront my past. I knew you would never forgive yourself for involving an innocent woman in your troubles," Nathan said. "I knew it would push you to find answers, to reach out to Missouri. And I truly hoped, that you might find happiness with her. The letters I wrote, Thomas, they were not lies. I wrote what I knew you felt but would never say. I described the man I know you to be." Clara stepped forward, studying Nathan carefully. "You wrote those letters with great care and feeling. You spoke of loneliness and hope. Were those your feelings or Thomas's? Both, Nathan admitted. We are not so different, my cousin and I. We both lost our lives that night 15 years ago. The difference is, I wanted him to have the chance to reclaim his. I wanted him to find what I could not. Why could you not? Clara asked gently. Nathan smiled sadly. Because I am a dying man, Miss Grace. Consumption. The doctor in San Antonio gave me perhaps 6 months. I wanted to see my cousin happy and settled before I go. I wanted to know he would not be alone. Thomas felt as if he had been punched in the chest. Nathan, no, you cannot die. I just found you again. We do not always get to choose, Nathan said. But Thomas, look at what we accomplished. You are free. Your name is cleared. And you have found a good woman who loves you. I can see it in how she looks at you, how she stands by your side. I do love him, Clara said quietly. Your letters helped me see the man he truly is. Thank you for that gift, Nathan. Nathan nodded, clearly struggling with emotion. Will you forgive me for the deception? Thomas looked at Clara, then back at his cousin. All his anger had drained away, leaving only sadness and a strange gratitude. There is nothing to forgive. You gave me back my life. The three of them stood by the creek as the sun finished setting, talking late into the night. Nathan told them about his years in hiding, about tracking Thomas's movements, about choosing Clara from dozens of letters he had received in response to his carefully worded advertisement in the Boston papers. You were the only one who wrote about your parents with such love, Nathan told Clara. The only one who seemed to understand that life is precious and short. I knew you would be good for Thomas, that you would push him to embrace life rather than hide from it. Stay with us, Thomas said. Whatever time you have left, spend it here with family. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. I would like that. I have been alone for too long. They brought Nathan back to the ranch, and William and Sarah, those kind souls, welcomed him without question. They set him up in a room in the main house, and Sarah immediately set about feeding him, convinced that good food could cure anything. Nathan's presence changed things, but in good ways. He and Thomas spent hours catching up, sharing stories of their separate lives. Nathan charmed Clara with tales of Thomas as a boy, mischievous and brave. He fit into the ranch community easily, helping where he could despite his weakening health. And Thomas courted Clara with renewed purpose. Knowing that life was precious and short, as Nathan's illness reminded him daily, he did not want to waste time. 2 weeks after Nathan's revelation, on a cool September evening, Thomas took Clara back to the creek where they had found the carving. Clara, he said, taking both her hands in his. I know we have only known each other for a few months. I know our beginning was unconventional, built on deception and mystery. But I also know that I love you. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you see the good in people. I love how you made a home here, how you fit into my life so perfectly it is as if you were always meant to be here. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Tom, I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stepped forward at the train station and offered to help, even though you had no idea what you were getting into. Thomas pulled a ring from his pocket. It had been his mother's, the only thing he had kept from his old life. Will you marry me, Clara Grace? Will you take Thomas James Harper with all his baggage and his past and build a future with him? Yes, Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. It was everything a first kiss should be, full of promise and passion and hope. They were married a month later, in October of 1878, in the small church in Jefferson. Nathan stood as Thomas's best man, looking frail but happy. Sarah wept throughout the ceremony, and William beamed with pride. The whole town turned out, curious to see the mail-order bride marry the cowboy who had lived among them for so long under a false name. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Thomas wore his best suit, newly purchased for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was chaste but heartfelt, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed half the county. People danced and laughed, celebrated this unlikely love story. Thomas held Clara close as they danced, marveling at how his life had changed in such a short time. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Clara answered. "Is this real?" "Sometimes I think I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is real," Thomas promised. "You are mine and I am yours, and we have our whole lives ahead of us." Nathan died 3 weeks later in his sleep, peacefully. They buried him on the ranch on a hill overlooking the creek. Thomas grieved deeply, but he was also grateful. Grateful for the time they had, for the closure, for the gift Nathan had given him in his final months. "He brought us together," Clara said at the graveside, holding Thomas's hand. "He gave us this life. We will honor his memory by living it fully." And they did. Thomas and Clara bought a small parcel of land from the Pritchards and built a house, nothing fancy but solid and warm. Thomas continued working as foreman while slowly developing his own small herd of cattle. Clara took in sewing and became known throughout the county for her beautiful work. Their first child, a son, was born in the summer of 1879. They named him Nathan James Harper, in honor of the cousin who had orchestrated their meeting. The boy had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment Thomas held him, he understood love in a way he never had before. "He is perfect," Clara whispered from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "Just like his mother," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for this gift." More children followed. A daughter, Grace Sarah, born in 1881, named for her mother and the woman who had welcomed Clara to Texas. Twin boys, William and Daniel, born in 1883, the latter named in memory of the man whose death had changed Thomas's life, a way of acknowledging that past while moving beyond it. Their home was full of noise and love, exactly what Thomas had never dared to dream of in his years of hiding. He would sometimes stand in the doorway, watching Clara with the children, and marvel at how completely his life had transformed. The mystery of Nathan's elaborate scheme became a family legend, a story they told their children on quiet evenings. How Aunt Clara had come to Texas to marry a stranger, how Uncle Nathan had brought them together from beyond the grave, how love had grown from deception into something true and lasting. Thomas never again used the name Tom Hill. He was Thomas Harper, a rancher, a husband, a father, a man with a past he no longer hid from and a future bright with possibility. The wanted posters that had haunted his nightmares for 15 years were long gone, replaced by family portraits and children's drawings on the walls of his home. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas took Clara back to the creek, to the tree where Nathan had carved their initials. The carving had grown faint with time, but it was still visible, a reminder of the man who had believed in love enough to orchestrate an impossible meeting. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked, holding Clara close. "Coming all this way based on letters from a stranger?" "Never," Clara said firmly. "Those letters led me to you, to this life, to our children. How could I regret the best decision I ever made, even though it started with a lie?" "It started with hope," Clara corrected. "Nathan gave us both hope and we turned it into love. That is all that matters." They carved their initials again, right below Nathan's original carving, but this time together. TJH plus CG 1888. Below it, they added the names of their children. A family tree in the literal sense, growing and branching out. As they walked back to their home, hand in hand, Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a frightened 18-year-old running from a corrupt judge, to a cowboy hiding under a false name, to a man who had reclaimed his identity and found love in the process. It had been a long and winding road, full of pain and fear, but it had led him exactly where he needed to be. Their children grew strong and healthy. Nathan James became a rancher like his father, eventually taking over the Double Creek when William Pritchard retired. Grace Sarah married a schoolteacher and moved to Dallas, but visited often with her own children. William and Daniel went into business together, opening a general store in Jefferson that became the heart of the community. Thomas and Clara grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on the porch of their home on quiet evenings, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors, their hands clasped together, comfortable in the silence that comes from truly knowing another person. "I have been thinking," Clara said one such evening when they were both well into their 60s and their hair had gone silver, "about those letters Nathan wrote." "What about them?" Thomas asked. "He said he was writing what you felt but would not say." "Do you think he was writing what he felt too? His own loneliness, his own hopes?" Thomas considered this. "Probably. Nathan was alone for so long. Maybe by bringing us together, he was living vicariously through us." "Then we lived enough for all three of us," Clara said softly. "Nathan, you and me. We built this beautiful life, this family. He is part of it even though he is gone." "Always," Thomas agreed. "He gave us this. He gave up his own chance at happiness to ensure we had ours." "Do you think he knew?" Clara asked. "That last day when he was so peaceful. Do you think he knew he had succeeded?" "I think he knew," Thomas said. "I told him that last night. I sat with him and I told him that I was happy, that Clara was the best thing that ever happened to me, that I would name my first son after him." He smiled. He knew. They sat in silence for a while, remembering. Then Clara laughed softly. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "I was just thinking about that first day at the train station, how terrified I was, how confused you were. If someone had told me then that I would spend the rest of my life with you, that we would build all of this, I do not think I would have believed them." "I would not have believed it either," Thomas admitted. "I thought I was destined to be alone, to spend my whole life hiding and running." "But you were not," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "You were destined for this, for me, for our children, for this life. Nathan saw it even when we could not." "He was a good man," Thomas said. "A better man than I gave him credit for in those early years." "He loved you," Clara said simply. "And he wanted you to be happy. That is what family does." As the sun set completely and the stars began to emerge in the vast Texas sky, Thomas pulled Clara closer. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they rocked gently in the porch swing he had built years ago when Grace Sarah was just a baby. This was happiness, Thomas thought. Not the dramatic, earth-shattering kind, but the quiet, everyday kind. The kind built on years of shared mornings and evenings, of raising children together, of weathering storms and celebrating joys. The kind that grows from seeds planted in deception but nurtured with honesty and love. His name was Thomas James Harper. For 15 years he had hidden from it, ashamed of the past it represented. But Clara had taught him that a name was just a word. What mattered was the life you built, the people you loved, the legacy you left behind, and what a legacy it was. 4 children, 12 grandchildren at last count, and more on the way. A ranch that thrived under Nathan James's management. A community that respected the Harper name. A love story that had started with impossible odds and ended with everything he had never dared to dream of. "I love you, Clara Harper," Thomas said into the darkness. "I love you too, Thomas Harper," Clara replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a mail-order bride who showed up at the station calling your name. Thank you for seeing past the confusion and the fear to the man underneath," Thomas said. "Thank you for staying." "I will always stay," Clara promised. "Until my last breath, I will always be right here beside you." They kept that promise. When Thomas died in 1901 at the age of 56, from a heart that simply wore out after a life fully lived, Clara held his hand and whispered words of love. And when Clara followed him 8 years later, in 1909, their children buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the creek, near Nathan's grave. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. The tree by the creek, with its multiple carvings, became a family shrine, a place where Harper descendants came to remember the love story that had started it all. The letters Nathan had written, carefully preserved by Clara, were passed down through the years, a testament to the power of hope and the unpredictable ways love finds us. In Jefferson, Texas, the story became legend. The mail-order bride who had used a name no one knew, and the cowboy who had hidden his true identity for 15 years. How they had found love in the midst of deception. How they had built a life that became the foundation for a family that thrived for generations. But for Thomas and Clara, it was never a legend. It was simply their life. A life built on second chances and unexpected grace. A life made possible by a dying man who loved his cousin enough to orchestrate an impossible meeting. A life full of the simple, profound joys of love, family, and home. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the dramatic beginning or the mysterious circumstances, but the everyday reality of two people who chose each other, again and again, for the rest of their lives. Who built something beautiful from broken pieces. Who proved that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start with impossible odds and end with forever. The sunset over the Texas plains was just as beautiful as Nathan had described in those letters. The home they built was just as warm. The family they created was just as loving. Everything the letters had promised came true, not because of deception, but because two people were brave enough to believe in the possibility of love, even when it came wrapped in mystery. Thomas Harper had spent 15 years running from his name, his past, his identity. But in the end, it was that very name, spoken aloud by a stranger at a train station, that had given him back his life. And what a life it had been.